Okay, calm down.
What happened with that letter that was released by the Progressive Caucus that Pramila Jayapal then walked back and basically rescinded? You were one of the only people who stood by it and defended it, which was kind of shocking because all it was calling for was diplomacy. It wasn't canceling anything, any support. It wasn't doing anything really remarkable at all. What can you talk about what happened? Like why was the letter released when it was? Was it really the mistake of staffers?
Well, I think the letter was common sense. I mean, all the letter said is that we stand by Ukraine. Putin's war was illegal. We will continue to support Ukraine, but we need to have diplomacy at the same time to prevent an escalation of the conflict, to prevent nuclear war. And now we see the generals are coming out in the front pages of the New York Times basically saying the same thing. We see that the administration actually now is engaged in a dialogue with their counterparts in Russia to prevent escalation. So I proudly stood by the letter. I think there was a moment of panic probably 2 weeks before the election that somehow this was going to have an outcome impact. Obviously, it had no outcome impact. And I wish more people had just stood by the letter.
And why do you think they didn't?
I think there was a large concern 2 weeks before the election that no one wanted to jeopardize the chances of the party or show that there was any discord. But what I said is I don't think anything in the letter was inconsistent with the approach that the president would take. And it seems like I've turned out to be right on that approach, given that the administration is engaging in some of these dialogues. The generals are recommending that course of action. And certainly I think that the staff of the CPC has done an excellent job. And I don't think any staff person should be to blame for decisions of members of Congress to sign a letter and make a judgment about a foreign policy issue. Probably was just a free ranger on that issue.
You passed legislation banning assistance to Azov, the Azov battalion. Is that still in effect?
I assume so. I mean, that was basically ensuring that none of the aid went to the Azov battalion, and it passed overwhelmingly in the House. And I assume that the State Department has considered that and taken steps to make sure that that's not happening. But that doesn't mean that we don't stand up for the sovereignty of Ukraine just because there may be 1 or 2% of the country's military that has those issues, or battalions that have those issues. Of course, we need to stand with Ukraine against Putin's illegal and unprovoked war.
But are you worried about where these weapons are winding up?
I'm concerned. I'd want to make sure that the State Department has the best protocols they can, but I also understand that this is a very difficult situation with Putin having blatantly violated Ukraine's sovereignty, and that the highest priority is to make sure that Putin's aggression is pushed back. And then in that context, we need to do whatever we can to make sure that the arms aren't getting into the wrong hands. But I realize that that's difficult in a war that is Putin's fault.
And how do you think the case can be made to your fellow progressives that diplomacy and negotiation should be pursued? I mean, to me, it just seems like if you care about Ukrainians and Ukrainian civilians, the priority would be bringing the war to an end, since all wars end through negotiation and diplomacy anyway. It's just a question of how many people die before that happens.
Well, I think we have to give the example of the Cold War. I mean, even when we were at the height of the Cold War opposing Russian aggression into Afghanistan, we still had conversations with the Russians, and in part that led to the Russian withdrawal in Afghanistan. And so if we want Putin not to escalate this war, if we want to make sure that he doesn't mobilize from 300,000 troops to 3 million, if we want to do things that prevent him from systematically targeting utility and electricity in Ukraine, obviously we have to support Ukraine. We have to make sure that they have arms, but we also have to engage in negotiations for deconflicting and de-escalation.